Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Hybrid Teacher, Using Technology to Teach in Person and Online, by Emma Pass, narrated by Rachel Perry. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures, tables, and charts present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Limit of liability, disclaimer of warranty. Although the publisher and author have used their best efforts in preparing this book, they make no representations or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the contents of this book, and specifically disclaim any implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. No warranty may be created or extended by sales representatives or written sales materials. The advice and strategies contained herein may not be suitable for your situation. You should consult with a professional where appropriate. Neither the publisher nor author shall be liable for any loss of profit or any other commercial damages, including, but not limited to, special, incidental, consequential, or other damages. Introduction. Far and away the best prize that life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. Theodore Roosevelt. The why. Before I start teaching a new unit, I always try to address the why with my students. Why are we learning about this? Why will it be meaningful to you? Why will it be beneficial to your life? For this book, I've not only asked myself the why, but a few more W's too. Here is what I've come up with. What? This is a book about using technology and online pedagogy to enhance teaching and learning as a whole. Who it is for? K through 12 teachers of all content areas in brick-and-mortar, remote, and hybrid schools. How it might be used. 1. Emergency preparedness. I was approached to write this book in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic when millions of schools globally shut their doors in order to reduce the transmission of disease and save lives. When it comes to safety, schools regularly prepare and practice for emergency scenarios. I imagine schools will now begin to adopt and regularly practice emergency remote learning to be prepared for future disease outbreaks, natural disasters, or any number of unforeseen circumstances. This is a guide for them. 2. Emerging hybrid school models. Although many teachers, students, parents, and administrators, rightfully, struggled with adapting to emergency remote or hybrid learning during the COVID-19 pandemic, I hope some innovative educators were able to see beyond the struggle to the benefits of hybrid learning for certain student populations. And new hybrid school models will begin emerging in districts across the country. This is a guide for them. 3. Educational technology benefits everyone. In a 2016 Arizona State University study on educational technology, EdTech, researchers found that the use of EdTech in teaching and learning can have considerable positive impacts on student performance, and efforts to adopt new educational technologies in the classroom will be rewarded. Although this book is focused on teaching in a hybrid model, the tools and techniques can be applied to most learning environments. The study also found that the biggest barrier to success in the implementation of EdTech is providing teachers with the necessary professional development. This is a guide for you. Bring it back to the building. If you teach full-time in a brick-and-mortar classroom, look for these sections where I explain how an online tool, resource, or strategy could be used in a traditional classroom model. My why. My first teaching job was as a 6th grade English teacher in Las Vegas, Nevada. My years there were easily the most challenging and rewarding of my life. My love for those first students of mine resonates throughout my entire body. My students came from the most diverse, in the true sense of the word, backgrounds imaginable. They were Black, white, Latinx, European, African, and Asian. They were the children of wealthy surgeons, as well as single parents who worked the night shift at Burger King. Some of my students had boats that they would take out on Lake Mead, while others were homeless. Our school was a magnet school for the deaf and hard of hearing, and we had a number of students who were Syrian refugees. Meeting the needs of such a diverse and large group, I taught nearly 200 students per year, was an impossible task. However, I thank my lucky stars every day that our school was awarded a grant in my first year of teaching to receive one-to-one Chromebook devices, meaning each student had access to their own device that they were able to use in school and take home. Because I had little other experience teaching, I threw myself entirely into learning how to use educational technology to engage my students and differentiate instruction to meet the needs of as many learners as possible. I was also incredibly lucky to have a teacher mentor, Lorenda Norman, who supported me and encouraged me to continue learning. A few years later, when my husband had the opportunity to cover a European news circuit, we jumped at the opportunity to live in London. There, I had another lucky break in meeting my next mentor, Andy Caffrey, with whom I traveled the country and continent working as an educational technology consultant, teaching and training other teachers to use technology in their classrooms. I currently live in my home state of Colorado, where I still work part-time as an EdTech consultant through my consulting company, Empowered Edu. I also teach 7th and 8th grade language arts at PSD Global Academy, PGA, a public hybrid school in which students spend half of their time learning in person and half of their time learning from home. I wanted to start with my story because the perspective of this book comes entirely from these experiences. A lot of what I write about comes not from research or interviews, but the time I've spent with students. Everything I do in education is for them. A note on access and equity. I want to address the privilege assumed in this book. My experiences in hybrid teaching are based largely on my current position as a teacher at PGA. We live in a well-funded, predominantly white city where we are able to provide laptop devices one-to-one to all of the students in our school and district. Further, many of the students who come to our hybrid school have a stay-at-home or work-from-home parent to support and encourage their learning during online/remote days. There are exceptions, but we are ultimately teaching in a position of great privilege. This type of digital access and support is not a reality for many schools and districts that are disproportionately made up of low-income, rural, Black, Latinx, and/or Native American populations. I say this to emphasize the existence of a digital divide in our country, which needs to be bridged so that we can provide access to technology, Wi-Fi, professional development, and after-school/at-home support to every student, school, and district nationwide. Shining a light on the issue is only the first step, and it is not enough. People in a position of privilege can choose to simply look away because it does not affect them. If you are in such a position, choose to turn toward the light, then act. There are several immediate steps we can take to help. Sign a petition on change.org demanding action to provide internet access to low-income families. Contact your state representatives to request additional funding to public education, specifically to address the digital divide. Donate to connecthomeusa.org, a company working to bridge the digital divide in government-assisted housing, or to donorschoose.org, where you can provide resources directly to teachers and classrooms nationwide. I have done my best to explore practical and tangible options for addressing access to technology in the section Access to Technology in Chapter 14. With great hope and effort, we will achieve digital access equity in our country. Teach on. Emma. Chapter 1. Synchronous and Asynchronous Learning. I never teach my pupils. I only attempt to provide the conditions in which they can learn. Albert Einstein. When we talk about teaching and learning, especially in the context of a digital learning environment, we are typically thinking about it in one of two ways. Synchronous learning. Teaching and learning occur together, simultaneously. This can happen in person or online. Asynchronous learning. Students access learning at different times and work through it at their own pace. Synchronous learning is what typically happens in a traditional brick-and-mortar school. It's what we think of when we hear teaching. The teacher stands in front of the class and delivers instruction, and the students receive the information simultaneously. Then students practice and apply their learning within the time constraints of the class period. However, it's important to note that synchronous learning can also be conducted remotely over a video conferencing platform, like Zoom or Google Meet, in a remote or hybrid learning scenario. In contrast, asynchronous learning is typically pre-built and posted for students on a learning management system, LMS, to access within the time constraints of a day, week, or unit. Many 100% online schools are entirely asynchronous, where students have access to the entirety of their pre-built coursework, unit, or module, and they work through it at their own pace. Hybrid schools often use a combination of both. Our PSD Global Academy, PGA, middle school schedule, for example, follows this system for delivering instruction. Monday, remote asynchronous. Tuesday, on-campus synchronous. Wednesday, remote or on-campus asynchronous. Thursday, on-campus synchronous. Friday, remote asynchronous. However, there are other methods for delivering synchronous/asynchronous instruction that you can learn about in the administrator's appendix. These examples are found in schools that are attempting to teach synchronously to students who are both in the classroom and at home by live streaming their lessons, concurrent instruction. I believe there are benefits to both synchronous and asynchronous instruction, and both should be adopted as instruction methods regardless of whether you're full-time brick-and-mortar, hybrid, or remote. Chapter 2. Synchronous Learning. Good teaching is 1/4 preparation and 3/4 theater. Gail Goldwyn. Synchronous learning. Teaching and learning occur together simultaneously. This can happen in person or online. Typically, whenever we are in the classroom with our students, we are engaging in synchronous learning. However, synchronous learning can also be delivered remotely via video conferencing platform like Zoom, Google Meet, or Skype. At PSD Global Academy, PGA, Middle School, we typically engage in synchronous learning 2 days per week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those lessons are done in person at our school building. During the COVID-19 school building closures, we simply moved our classes to a video conferencing program, Google Meet, maintaining nearly the exact same schedule that we had in person. Monday, remote asynchronous, Tuesday, remote synchronous, Wednesday, remote asynchronous, Thursday, remote synchronous, Friday, remote asynchronous. Although I almost always prefer in-person synchronous learning to video conferencing, having those established times during the week to meet as a class to check in, see each other's faces, and hear each other's voices felt necessary not only for our academic success, but for the social-emotional well-being of students. I am going to assume that most teachers listening to this book are comfortable with delivering synchronous instruction live or in person, so I will use the rest of this chapter to explain how synchronous teaching and learning can be adapted to an online environment. Still, keep in mind that many of these tools and tips could also be integrated into in-person synchronous instruction when we return to the classroom. For example, see the section, The Chat Box, later in this chapter, to see how I plan to use the chat box in my brick-and-mortar classroom. Choosing a video conferencing platform. Most schools or districts will provide you with a video conferencing platform, but if you have a choice, here are some factors worth considering. Zoom. Pros: waiting rooms, private chat. Cons: limited features in the free version, potential security risks. Microsoft Teams. Pros: Microsoft Teams Chat saves communication in a chat room after the call ends. Cons: limited features in the free version. Google Meet. Pros: simple and intuitive. Google Classroom integration. Cons: limited features in the free version. Since the initial publication of this book in June 2021, all three platforms have been working hard to meet the needs of remote educators, and all three now have hand-raising, breakout rooms, and custom background features. Keep in mind, however, that all platforms are continuing to make changes and release additional features in the upcoming months, so check their websites for updated information. At PGA, we use Microsoft Teams for our staff meetings and Google Meet to teach our students. I prefer Google Meet and most Google products because they are simple, easy to use, and integrate well into the Google ecosystem. Throughout this book, I will be referencing Google Meet when I discuss video conferencing or meeting online. Key video conferencing features. Regardless of what you choose to use, any video conferencing software will have these key features. The microphone. It is the norm in my synchronous online classes that students' microphones are muted unless they are called upon. This is essential for students to be able to focus on the content being delivered. I try to hear my students' voices as much as possible during class, and will ask students to unmute their microphones throughout the lesson. We also have class discussions and small group discussions where students are encouraged to speak. However, all of these activities need to be done thoughtfully to avoid chaos. There are just too many background sounds in all of our homes: cats, kids, dogs, garbage trucks, for more than a few people to have their microphones unmuted at any one time. I explain this to my students at the beginning of the year, and also point out that keeping your microphones muted is the norm in virtual business meetings as well. So, practicing will help prepare them for possible future employment. The camera. Similar to the microphone, the camera feature can be turned on or off. It is wonderful to see your students' faces when teaching remotely, and I encourage my students to leave their cameras on, but I always make it optional. Some of my students are embarrassed to show their rooms or houses. Some don't have the luxury of learning in a private space. Some have anxiety about being on camera, and to be honest, it can be really distracting to see your own face when you are trying to concentrate on a lesson. Whatever the reason, if a student doesn't want to turn their camera on, I don't make them. Cameras on or cameras optional? The increase in remote learning because of COVID-19 has led to a heated debate in the online learning community. Do we require students to turn their cameras on for class, or let it be optional? First, we need to consider the data and privacy circumstances. Is the class being recorded? If so, where is that recording going to be accessible? It's always a good idea to check with your IT department about data and privacy compliance. Personally, I let cameras be optional in my online classes and try to engage my students in other ways. Although I love to see their faces, I understand that it can be uncomfortable to see your own face while trying to pay attention to class, and, more than that, uncomfortable to let your fellow classmates see into your room or home. The chat box. Every video conferencing tool will have a chat box. Because speaking is more limited in online synchronous learning, I frequently use the chat box to get feedback from my students and keep them engaged. Using the chat box for student participation during class has been one of the greatest silver linings I found when teaching synchronously over Google Meet. Some of my students, who were very reserved and reluctant to participate in brick-and-mortar class conversations, were very active in the chat box and allowed me to see a completely different side to them. It also allowed me to hear more students' voices throughout class without the disruption of 30 actual voices breaking out into discussion that I have to rein back in. During class over Google Meet, I can ask a question and see all my students' responses in the chat box in a matter of moments. Aside from asking specific questions, here are the common keywords I ask my students to put into the chat box. Here. When students first arrive, I have them type here into the chat box so I can easily scroll back through their names to take attendance. Hall pass. If a student needs to step away from their screen to use the bathroom or take care of a family matter, I ask them to type hall pass into the chat box so I know not to call on them or to catch them up when they return. I'm back. When a student returns, either from the bathroom or from completing an assignment on a new tab or window, I ask that they type I'm back or I'm done into the chat box so I know they are all back in the Meet, can see my screen, and are ready to move on. Clap, clap. If a student shares during class, I ask the rest of their classmates to give them virtual applause in the chat box, either by typing clap, 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 or inserting celebratory emojis. 1 to 10. I'll often ask students to rate something on a scale of 1 to 10, whether it's how they are feeling or how interesting an article was. Getting a number in the chat box is quick and easy. Bye. Finally, I always ask my students to say goodbye before they leave a virtual class by either typing in the chat box or unmuting their microphones. Bring it back to the building. I've enjoyed using the chat box so much, in fact, that I am planning on using a chat box in the brick-and-mortar classroom as well through Back-Channel Chat. Back-Channel Chat is an online chat platform that allows teachers to create a chat room and invite students to join without needing students to sign up or enter an email. I plan to post the code for Back-Channel at the start of each class and ask my students to use it throughout the lesson on their individual laptop devices to respond to questions and add comments. I will be moderating the chat on a tablet, locking the room if students aren't on topic. When responding to classroom questions, sometimes students will be asked to respond in the chat. Other times, they will be asked to turn and talk, and often I'll give them the option to type their response or raise their hand and share. This allows some of my more introverted students an opportunity to contribute to the conversation when they otherwise might not. A few added benefits to Back-Channel Chat are teachers can delete individual chats, pin chats to the top of the feed, moderate messages, send students private chats, send polls, and lock the chat board to prevent further messaging. There is a free version with less security features and a premium version with more. Record. Another key feature that Zoom, Google Meet, and Microsoft Teams have in common is the record button. Different schools and districts might have different interpretations of data privacy laws in whether you can record your synchronous online lesson, and it's important to check with your administrator for that direction. If you are able to record, I would highly recommend recording all your online synchronous classes, and perhaps your live brick-and-mortar classes too. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many teachers were asked to teach simultaneously to a group of students in the classroom and a group at home. Although I don't believe this style of hybrid learning to be the most effective for teaching and learning, I do think the practice of filming and recording our lessons can have tremendous benefits. First, consider student absences and the increased equity in being able to provide a recording of your missed lesson to a student who might not be able to make the class because they are taking care of siblings, sick parents, or working to help their families. Having a recording of the class will enable that student to participate in the class to an extent, at a later time or date, and it creates less work for the teacher in having to reteach to that student when they return to the school building. Second, it holds you and your students accountable. There is no he said, she said when there is a recording of what happened in class. Finally, it can serve as a resource for any student, present, past, or future, who might want to review the content you covered in that lesson. You might consider editing your videos down to just include the direct instruction and putting them into a website for reference, like an FAQ page. Summer project, anyone? For teachers teaching over video conferencing, the recording process would be to simply hit record. Bring it back to the building. For teachers in the brick-and-mortar classroom, I would join a Google Meet alone, share your screen, hit record, and make sure that if you are walking around during class, you are using a wireless microphone to continue recording your voice. You can get wireless RF, radio frequency microphones online, or use wireless earphones like AirPods. Digital whiteboards. Finally, all your basic video conferencing platforms have integration with digital whiteboard tools that not only enable you to annotate during live lectures, but also have features that will allow students to collaborate as they discuss, work, and brainstorm. Google Jamboard, Microsoft Whiteboard, Zoom Whiteboard. Each video conferencing whiteboard is designed to either be controlled only by the presenter or shared with participants to collaborate on. Whiteboard.fi is a great whiteboard alternative for teachers looking to give each student their own individual whiteboard to work on. Additionally, Whiteboard.fi does not require student logins. The teacher can view all student whiteboards on a dashboard to monitor work and push content onto students' whiteboards, such as practice problems. For more on using digital whiteboards during teaching, refer to the synchronous instruction lesson breakdown section in this chapter. Bring it back to the building. Digital whiteboards are becoming a more popular option for brick-and-mortar teaching because of the ability to save lectures, share or print the whiteboard screens, and pick up where you left off, all of which are challenging on a traditional whiteboard. Not to mention the flexibility of digital whiteboards when used on a tablet, allowing teachers to move around the room. The teacher can project their whiteboard file to the front of the classroom, share the link with students to view on their own devices, or better yet, give students access to collaborate. Setting expectations. Teachers are accustomed to dedicating the start of every school year to establishing the norms and expectations of their class. Part of that process is introducing students to the physical classroom space and helping students understand how to navigate it. A virtual classroom is no different. Start the year with a tour of the virtual environment. Teach your students how to use the different functions of the video conferencing platform, and be sure to clearly establish your norms and expectations. I have narrowed video conferencing norms and expectations down to 3 that are specific to the online environment. 1. You must be present and actively engaged in the lesson. Being present and actively engaged means the students need to be in front of the screens for the entire lesson without physically wandering off to the bathroom or kitchen, or digitally wandering off to other games or tabs. If a student really needs to step away from their computer, they need to use the hall pass protocol described previously. Part of that presence is how they show up in front of their cameras if they choose to turn them on. Students know they are expected to show up for their cameras as they would for school, meaning dressed appropriately and without distracting props. I remind students that if something distracting is happening behind them at home, they can always turn their cameras off. They also need to be actively engaged in the lesson. It is all too easy for a student to join the session, turn off their camera, and wander off to do other things. My online synchronous lessons require students to be actively responding to questions in the chat box. Pear Deck, more on this in the following section, synchronous instruction lesson breakdown, or working on a collaborative document that I can see. Students need to be engaged in this work to receive attendance or credit for the lesson. 2. Microphones must be muted unless told otherwise. See the preceding protocol. 3. The chat box must be on topic once the lesson.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?